Welcome to Forgotten History. I am William, and tonight we journey into one of history's most fascinating and darkest stories. It is a tale of courage in the face of adversity, of men who defied the odds to serve their country with honor, but were met with prejudice and disdain by the very nation they swore to protect. The story begins on July 19, 1941, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, a landmark decree that prohibited racial discrimination in the war industry. But while this order was seen as a major breakthrough for African Americans, it was merely a band-aid solution to the deep-seated racism that permeated American society at the time. We find ourselves in the midst of World War II, and America's military is struggling to respond to the changing tides of global conflict. The need for skilled pilots becomes increasingly urgent, but the door to opportunity remains firmly closed to one group: African Americans. This, despite the fact that many young black men had already proven themselves as capable and dedicated aviators in the civilian pilot training program. The fate of these pioneering airmen would soon become intertwined with one of the most iconic chapters in American military history: the struggle against the Nazi regime in Europe. But what's astonishing is this: when the Tuskegee Airmen, America's first black military pilots, arrived on the front lines in North Africa, they were met with such hostility from their own countrymen. The name Tuskegee itself becomes synonymous with a legacy of excellence and determination. This was the Air Force unit created specifically for African American pilots, despite initial opposition from military leaders who questioned their ability to fly combat missions. And yet, when the Tuskegee Airmen finally took to the skies in May 1943, they did so not just as representatives of their own community, but as defenders of America itself. Tonight on Forgotten History Daily, we'll take you inside this remarkable story of heroism and sacrifice, examining the personal struggles faced by these pioneering pilots, as well as the broader social context. Join me as we uncover one of the most compelling chapters in American history, a testament to the enduring power of courage and resilience in the face of prejudice. As the Tuskegee Airmen began their training in Alabama, they were met with a mix of curiosity and hostility from their white peers. Many whites doubted their ability to fly combat missions, viewing them as inferior pilots who would not be able to keep up with the demands of war. But these African American men had already proven themselves in civilian life, earning their wings through hard work and determination. One such pilot was Captain Noel F. Parrish, a 26-year-old Tuskegee graduate from Oklahoma, who would go on to become one of the unit's most decorated pilots. "I remember when we first arrived at our base in North Africa," Parrish recalled in an interview years later. "There were some white soldiers who didn't want us around, who thought we'd never be able to fly combat missions. But we proved them wrong, time and again." Despite the initial skepticism from their own countrymen, the Tuskegee Airmen quickly earned a reputation as top-notch pilots. Their flying skills were on par with those of their white counterparts, and they began to rack up impressive scores in aerial combat. By the summer of 1943, just a few months after arriving in Africa, the unit had already shot down over 60 enemy aircraft. But for all their success in the skies, the Tuskegee Airmen continued to face racism and segregation on the ground. When they arrived at their base in North Africa, they were forced to live in segregated quarters, despite the fact that many of them had been trained alongside white pilots in Alabama. The situation was made even more difficult by the fact that some white soldiers were openly hostile towards them, viewing them as inferior. I remember one incident where we were told to share our quarters with a group of white pilots, recalled Captain Charles McGee, another veteran Tuskegee pilot. But when they arrived, they were armed and didn't want to coexist with us. It was a tense situation that could have easily turned violent. The segregation and racism faced by the Tuskegee Airmen extended far beyond their living arrangements. When they went on leave in major cities like Rome, Paris, They were often met with hostility from locals who did not want to serve them. In some cases, they even had to fight for service at local restaurants or cafes. Despite these challenges, the Tuskegee Airmen persevered, buoyed by their sense of duty and pride in serving their country. They knew that they were fighting on behalf of all Americans, regardless of color, and they refused to let racism or segregation get in their way. As we'll see in our next segment, the Tuskegee Airmen's experiences would soon take a dramatic turn as they faced off against some of the most elite pilots in the German Air Force. But for now, let's stay with Captain Parrish and his unit, navigate the complexities of racial tension and military politics. As we continue to explore this remarkable story, it becomes clear that the Tuskegee Airmen were not just fighting for their country, they were also fighting for a fundamental human right, equality. And though they would face many challenges along the way, their bravery and resilience in the face of adversity would ultimately change the course of American history forever. Stay tuned to hear more about this incredible chapter in American military history. We'll examine the dramatic air battles that took place over North Africa, as well as the personal struggles faced by the Tuskegee Airmen on the ground. And we'll reveal some surprising new insights into the social and cultural context of World War II, including a shocking revelation about the US government's own involvement in perpetuating segregation. But for now, let's return to Captain Parrish, who shares his thoughts on what motivated him and his fellow Tuskegee Airmen. "We knew that we were part of something bigger than ourselves," he recalled. "We were fighting not just for our country, but for a future where people would be judged on their abilities, not the color of their skin." September 1943. The sun beats down relentlessly on the North African desert. The air is thick with the acrid smell of sand and dust, a perpetual reminder of the harsh environment that these young men are fighting to protect. We're in the midst of World War II, a global conflict that's drawing to its climax. But Tuskegee Airmen, the fight is personal. It's not just about defeating Nazi Germany or fascist Italy. It's about themselves as worthy members of their own society. As we explore the world through which these brave men moved, let's set the scene. Imagine a place where segregation and racism were woven into the very fabric of everyday life. The United States, 1943, a time when Jim Crow laws ruled over the South, when African Americans were forced to sit at the back of buses, eat in separate restaurants, and drink from different water fountains.
These aren't just abstract concepts. They're harsh realities that the Tuskegee Airmen faced every day.
But as we've seen with Captain Parrish's unit, their service was not a reward for their segregation. It was, in fact, a necessary evil. The US military had no choice but to recruit African American pilots if they were going to meet the growing demand for air support in North Africa. The base at Tel El Kabir, Egypt, is where our story unfolds next. This sprawling complex of tents and barracks was home to the 99th Fighter Squadron, one of the 3 units that made up the 332nd Fighter Group, a group that would become synonymous with bravery, skill. As we walk through the dusty streets of the base, you'll see men in crisp uniforms, their faces set with a mix of focus and frustration. For these young men, life on base was a peculiar blend of discipline and discomfort. Their days began before dawn, with revel blasting over the loudspeakers, followed by a quick breakfast and a briefing from their commanders. The airfield itself was a marvel of modern engineering. Rows of P-51 Mustangs stood at the ready, their sleek lines glinting in the sunlight. But beneath this facade of military efficiency lay a more complex reality. These men were fighting for their country, yet they were treated as second-class citizens. Their quarters were often cramped and unsanitary, with shared facilities that reeked of mold and mildew. And then there was the food, meager rations that left even the most stoic among them complaining about the lack of decent grub. This, then, is life for an African-American soldier in World War II America. It's a world that's both familiar and alien to us today. We think we know what it means to fight for freedom, but do we truly understand what these men faced every day? The answer lies in the contradictions. They were fighting for their country, yet they were treated as inferior. They were part of the greatest military machine the world had ever seen, yet they were forced to live apart. As we navigate this complex web of segregation and racism, it's essential to remember that these men were not just soldiers, they were also citizens. And in 1943, being a citizen in America meant living with the constant threat of racial violence. Lynching was a stark reality for African Americans, a spectre that hung over their heads like a dark cloud. The Tuskegee Airmen knew this all too well. They'd seen friends and comrades beaten, harassed, or worse, victims of a system that seemed determined to crush them at every turn. And yet, despite it all, they refused to give up. Their sense of duty and pride drove them forward, fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting not just for their country, but for a future where people would be judged on their abilities, not the color of their skin. As we continue our journey through this pivotal moment in American history, we'll explore the dramatic air battles that took place over North Africa, clashes that pitted some of the most skilled pilots against each other. We'll examine the personal struggles faced by these men as they tried to balance their military duties with the harsh realities of racism back home. And we'll reveal some surprising new insights into the social and cultural context of World War II, including a shocking revelation about the US government's own involvement in perpetuating segregation. But for now, let's stay focused on the Tuskegee Airmen themselves, men who would come to embody the very spirit of American ingenuity and determination. Their story is one that needs to be told and retold, a reminder of what it means to stand up for what you believe in, even when the world around you seems determined to pull you down. As we delve deeper into this remarkable chapter in American history, remember that these men were not just fighting for their country, they were also fighting for a fundamental human right, equality.
And so, as we embark on this journey with the Tuskegee Airmen, ask yourself, what would I do if faced with the same challenges?
Would I stand up to race and segregation, or would I succumb to the pressures of a society that seems determined to crush me? The answers lie in the history books. But they're not just dusty relics. They're living, breathing reminders of what we can achieve when we stand together for what's right. As we leave the training grounds of Tuskegee behind, let's return to the summer of 1942, and a time when the war in North Africa was heating up. The Allies had launched a major campaign against the Axis powers, with British, American, and Commonwealth forces clashing with German and Italian troops on the desert sands. It was during this tumultuous period that the first group of Tuskegee Airmen arrived in Egypt, where they would join the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black unit to see combat. Led by Captain Charles DeBow, a veteran pilot from Georgia, these young men were eager to prove themselves on the battlefield. But as they took to the skies for their first missions, they faced a daunting challenge. The German Air Force, or Luftwaffe, with its superior aircraft and experienced pilots, the enemy was a formidable foe, one that would test the mettle of even the most seasoned aviators. The Tuskegee Airmen were no exception. Flying P-40 Warhawk fighters, they took on the enemy in dogfights above the Libyan desert, engaging in fierce battles that would leave their aircraft scarred and their pilots shaken. One such battle occurred on August 17, 1942, over El Agheila, a key airfield in Libya. Led by Captain DeBow, the 99th Pursuit Squadron clashed with a squadron of Messerschmitt Bf-109s, resulting in one of the most epic dogfights of the war. The Tuskegee Airmen fought bravely, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. In the heat of battle, several of their planes went down, including that of Captain DeBow's wingman, Lieutenant Joseph Gomer. Despite being badly injured, Gomer managed to bail out safely, but his aircraft was destroyed. The loss was a sobering reminder of the risks the men faced every time they took off into the skies. And yet, despite the odds against them, the Tuskegee Airmen continued to fight on, determined to prove their worth as pilots and as Americans. Their bravery in the face of adversity did not go unnoticed. Back in the United States, a growing sense of pride and admiration for the Tuskegee Airmen began to build. As news of their exploits reached the public, many began to see these men in a new light, as heroes who were fighting not just for their country, but for a future where all Americans could be treated with dignity and respect. But while the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements in combat were widely acknowledged, the reality of racism back home continued to plague them. In many southern cities, segregation was still the law of the land, and black soldiers were often forced to live in separate quarters, eat at segregated mess halls, and use inferior facilities. It was a contradiction that many Americans struggled to understand. How could these men be fighting for their country abroad when they faced such discrimination within their own borders? The answer, as we'll explore in the next chapter, lay not just in the policies of the US military, but also in the very fabric of American society itself. As we delve deeper into this pivotal moment in American history, one thing becomes clear. The Tuskegee Airmen's story is a testament to the power of determination and resilience. Despite facing unimaginable obstacles, these men refused to give up, and their bravery would ultimately change the course of American history forever. The year was 1941, and the world was on the brink of chaos. The skies were filled with the roar of aircraft, the scent of smoke wafted through the air, and the rumble of guns shook the ground beneath their feet. It was a time of great uncertainty, but also of incredible opportunity. For the United States military, it marked the beginning of a new era, one that would see the involvement of African Americans in combat for the first time. And at the heart of this movement were the Tuskegee Airmen, a group of young men who would go on to become some of the greatest heroes of World War II. But before we meet them, let's take a step back and look at the world they lived in. The United States in 1941 was a country divided. Racial segregation was alive and well, with black Americans facing countless restrictions on their daily lives. They were forced to sit at the back of buses, use separate walk-ins, and eat in segregated restaurants. It's hard to imagine now, but this was the America that existed just over 80 years ago. And it's against this backdrop that we find ourselves looking for a glimmer of hope, a light in the darkness that would guide these young men towards their destiny. That light came in the form of a man named Captain Noel F. A veteran pilot from Illinois, Parrish was one of the first to recognize the potential of African American aviators. He believed that with proper training and support, they could become some of the best pilots in the world. In January 1941, Parrish made his case to a group of senior officers at the US Army Air Corps. He presented them with data from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which showed that African Americans were just as capable of flying aircraft as their white counterparts. The numbers were staggering. In fact, they were so convincing that even the most hardened skeptics couldn't deny them. And so, after months of deliberation, a decision was finally made. In June 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 80A2, which paved the way for African Americans to be trained as pilots in the US Army Air Corps. But this wasn't just about breaking down racial barriers. It was also about filling a critical gap in America's military capabilities. The Japanese had launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor just 3 months earlier, and the United States was now at war. The demand for skilled aviators was greater than ever before. It fell to a man named Captain Noel F. Parrish to lead the charge. Alongside a small team of instructors, he established the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black unit that would go on to become one of the most iconic military aviation units in history. Their journey began at Tuskegee Army Airfield, a small airbase in Alabama. Men would learn to fly and fight. It was here that they faced their first major challenge, winning over their white commanders, who were still struggling to accept them as equals. The early days of training were marked by a mix of skepticism and hostility from some quarters. But Parrish remained steadfast, convinced that his team had what it took to succeed. We're not just here to prove ourselves. He said in an interview with the Chicago Defender at the time, "We're here to defend our country, and we'll do whatever it takes to get the job done." As the months passed, Parrish's words became a mantra for the young men of the 99th Pursuit Squadron. They trained tirelessly, poring over manuals, practicing their takeoffs and landings, and honing their flying skills until they were second to none. Their dedication paid off in spades. By the summer of 1942, the Tuskegee Airmen had graduated to become some of the most skilled pilots in the US military. They were ready for combat, but what awaited them was a challenge unlike anything they could have imagined. It's a story that we'll explore further in this series, as we delve into the harrowing experiences of these brave men. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on the incredible journey they had undertaken so far. Being relegated to second-class status by their own country to becoming some of the most respected pilots in the US military. It was a remarkable transformation, and one that would set them apart as true heroes of World War II.
As the Tuskegee Airmen prepared to embark on their first combat mission, they were still grappling with the harsh realities of racism and segregation back home.
Despite their rebel progress in the skies, they were forced to endure humiliating conditions on the ground. They had to eat at separate mess halls, use separate bathrooms, and even sleep in segregated barracks. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Noel F. Parrish, was determined to shield his men from as much of this racism as possible. He made sure that they were given the same living quarters, training facilities, and equipment as their white counterparts. But despite his efforts, the disparities were still glaringly apparent. One Tuskegee Airman, Lieutenant Gale S. Halverson, would later recall the dignities he suffered during this time. "We had to drink out of water fountains, labeled colored only," he said in an interview with the Smithsonian Institute. "It was just a constant reminder that we were not equal, no matter how well we performed." But as they prepared to leave for North Africa, the Tuskegee Airmen's focus shifted from fighting against racism at home to fighting. They were deployed to Tunisia in January 1943, where they would soon find themselves in the thick of World War II. Their first mission was a reconnaissance flight over the Axis-occupied city of Bizerte. Led by Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr., the Tuskegee Airmen successfully completed their objectives without incident. It was a minor victory, but one that marked an important turning point for the squadron. Over the coming weeks and months, the Tuskegee Airmen would prove themselves time and again in combat. They shot down enemy planes, destroyed enemy equipment, and demonstrated a level of skill and bravery that earned them widespread respect from their white comrades in arms. One notable exception was Captain Charles McGee, a seasoned pilot who had flown over 70 combat missions with the 332nd Fighter Group. McGee would later recall the tense moments he faced during one particularly grueling mission. "We were flying escort for bombers over Italy," he said in an interview. "We took on a bunch of Messerschmitts, and I ended up getting shot down myself. But our squadron managed to hold off the enemy long enough for us to make it back safely." Despite these triumphs, the Tuskegee Airmen continued to face systemic racism back home. They were often relegated to performing menial tasks or taking on second-class roles within their units. It was a bitter pill for many of them to swallow. But even as they struggled with this ingrained prejudice, the Tuskegee Airmen remained resolute in their commitment to duty and country. Their motto, "United we stand, united we fight," had become a mantra that resonated throughout the squadron.
As we continue our exploration of this remarkable chapter in American history, we'll delve deeper into the stories of individual Tuskegee Airmen who defied racism, broke barriers, and forged an unbreakable bond with their fellow pilots.
As the Tuskegee Airmen continued to soar through the skies, their exploits began to make headlines back in America. But amidst the excitement of their victories, a new challenge emerged, one that would test their mettle and strain their resolve. In March 1943, just as they were hitting their stride in North Africa, the squadron received news that they would be relocating to Italy. The move was seen as a vital step in the Allied campaign against the Axis powers, but for the Tuskegee Airmen, it meant facing fresh challenges and dangers. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr.'s words of caution echoed through the squadron. "We'll have to keep our eyes peeled for enemy fighters. They're not going down without a fight." His warning was well taken, as they settled into their new base in Ramatelli, Italy. The first few weeks were grueling, with missions unfolding at a breakneck pace. In one particularly harrowing engagement, Captain Emmett Revere Cannonball Kelly took to the skies, his P-51 Mustang roaring through the clouds as he engaged enemy planes in dogfights. Kelly's flying skills had long been renowned, but even he couldn't have anticipated the fury that awaited him on that fateful day. "We were vectored towards a group of Me-109s," Kelly recalled in an interview with his squadron mates. "Next thing I knew, was surrounded by enemy planes. It was like being in a madhouse. The stakes were higher than ever before. Every pilot knew that a single miscalculation could spell disaster." Meanwhile, the squadron's maintenance crew toiled tirelessly behind the scenes. They were responsible for keeping the aircraft flying, and it wasn't an easy task. Fuel leaks, mechanical failures, and enemy fire all threatened to bring their delicate balance of air power crashing down. "We worked day and night," said one mechanic, who wished to remain anonymous. "We'd patch up a plane, only to have it fly back out for another mission, sometimes in the same day." The strain was beginning to tell. Cracks were starting to show in the squadron's veneer of confidence. As the months dragged on, the toll began to mount. Lieutenant James Washington, a rising star among the pilots, found himself at odds with his commanding officer over tactical decisions. Washington argued that they needed to push deeper into enemy territory, taking greater risks to disrupt supply lines and cripple Axis forces. His CO remained skeptical, but Washington's conviction only grew stronger. I remember one particular conversation where he said, "Ben, I know you think we're ready for this, but sometimes you gotta take a chance." Washington recalled in an interview. "And I told him, 'Sir, we've been taking chances since they arrived here, and it's about time someone took them seriously.'" Tensions between the two men continued to simmer, even as they led their pilots into ever more trek. The stakes were mounting. The enemy was becoming increasingly bold, exploiting every weakness in the Allied air campaign. It would take a dramatic turn of events to bring this powder keg of conflicting opinions and clashing personalities to a head, an event that would shake the very foundations of the squadron to its core. That moment arrived on September 13, 1944. The battle skies above Italy were about to erupt in one final explosive confrontation. It started with a routine reconnaissance mission over southern France. Lieutenant James Washington led the charge, his flight weaving through enemy anti-aircraft fire as they zeroed in on their target. But what happened next would shatter the very fabric of the squadron and leave Washington facing a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In that split second, something went terribly wrong. A single error of judgment by one of Washington's wingmen led to disaster. They were ambushed by enemy fighters, their aircraft shattered in midair. Washington sprang into action, flying at breakneck speed through the mayhem as he battled to keep his squadron alive. "I remember thinking, 'My God, this can't be happening,'" he said later, shaking his head. "We'd been so proud of our training, so convinced we could handle anything. But that moment, it was like watching your worst nightmare unfold before your eyes." The battle raged on for what felt like an eternity. Washington's in, but it was not without cost. One of his pilots, Lieutenant James Brown Jr., failed to return from the mission. Washington's emotions were raw: anger at the outcome, sadness for his fallen comrade, but also a deep sense of personal regret. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he'd been partly responsible for Brown's fate. "We talked about this afterwards," Washington mused, "and some said it was just bad luck. But you can't help wondering what could have been done differently." That agonizing question would haunt him for years to come. as it did countless other. As the squadron finally secured their return to safety, the atmosphere in Ramatali grew heavy. The once stirring camaraderie that had sustained them throughout the campaign now seemed fragile and strained. Even Washington's unshakable confidence was beginning to waver. He couldn't help but wonder if they'd been too bold, too reckless, or simply not skilled enough. "We were all of us flying on adrenaline," he admitted later. "You can only push your luck so far, and sometimes that just isn't enough." In the aftermath of the mission, Lieutenant Colonel Davis summoned his pilots for an impromptu debriefing session. His tone was laced with a mix of sadness and frustration, but also, unmistakably, pride. "You folks have shown what's possible," he began softly. "What can be achieved when we stick together and push ourselves to the limit? We've lost some good men, friends who'll never come back, but that doesn't mean we give up." As his words hung in the air, Washington couldn't help but glance over at Kelly, that unflappable veteran with the storied reputation. "We will get through this," Davis continued. "We have to, because we know one thing. When it comes down to it, we're not just fighting for our country.
We're fighting for each other. As the debriefing session drew to a close, Washington felt a sense of resolve wash over him.
He knew that Davis was right. They had been fighting not just for their country, but for each other, and for the pride of being part of this historic squadron. But beneath the surface, he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had been growing inside him since Brown's sacrifice. The truth was, Washington had always known that the Tuskegee Airmen were in a unique position, fighting against their own country's prejudices, while fighting for it on the battlefield. Despite the progress they'd made, despite the accolades and recognition from higher-ups, there were still those who doubted them, who questioned their ability to lead, to strategize, to fly as effectively as their white counterparts. It was a constant source of frustration for Washington and his fellow pilots, but also a painful reminder that even in this moment of shared struggle and sacrifice, they remained outsiders, relegated to the fringes of. As the days passed, Washington found himself increasingly withdrawn from the rest of the squadron. He couldn't bear the thought of celebrating their successes with the same enthusiasm as before, not when he knew that every victory was tainted by the knowledge that they were being judged on a separate set of standards. And often, coming up one evening, as he was walking back to his quarters, Washington ran into Lieutenant Colonel Davis, who approached him with an uncharacteristically somber expression. "Washington," he said quietly, "can I have a word with you?" They walked together in silence for a few minutes, before Davis spoke up again. "Listen, kid, I know things are tough right now. The losses we've taken, the doubts that linger, but you and your fellow pilots need to remember something. We're not just fighting against the enemy out there. We're fighting against the ones back here who doubt us." Washington felt a surge of anger at Davis. "What do you mean?" he asked. Davis's eyes locked onto Washington's, filled with a deep sadness. "I mean that we have to confront this head on," he said quietly. "We can't keep pretending that it doesn't exist, that the doubts and fears aren't seeping into our ranks. We need to take back control of our narrative, show them what we're truly capable of." Washington felt a shiver run down his spine as Davis's words hung in the air. He knew exactly what he was talking about. The endless meetings with commanders who questioned their tactics and strategies. The whispered doubts among other pilots that they were somehow less capable than their white counterparts. For the first time since Brown's sacrifice, Washington felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Davis was right. Maybe it was time for them to take back control, to show America what the Tuskegee Airmen truly represented. Not just exceptional pilots and soldiers, but symbols of resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming adversity. As they parted ways that evening, Washington felt a newfound sense of purpose, one that went beyond mere flying or fighting. He was part of something bigger than himself now, a movement that would change the course of American history forever. As the days turned into weeks, the Tuskegee Airmen continued to push against the tide of racism that surrounded them. But little did they know, their struggles were only a small part of a much larger issue. Behind the scenes, The US government was grappling with its own demons, and the consequences would soon become all too clear. In 1943, as the Tuskegee Airmen's reputation grew, so did tensions within the military establishment. The Army Air Forces, responsible for training pilots, had a long history of racist policies. Many believed that African Americans were better suited to menial jobs on bases, rather than flying planes. This attitude was perpetuated by powerful figures such as Lieutenant General Ira C. Eaker, who publicly expressed doubts about the ability of black pilots. One little-known fact is that the Tuskegee Airmen's very own leader, Colonel Noel F. Parrish, was not initially a fan of their program. In a 1942 memo, he wrote, "It would be unwise to permit these men to fly aircraft of high combat value." This mindset reflects a pervasive attitude within the military at the time. As we delve deeper into this story, it's essential to understand that racism was not only a product of individual prejudices, but also of institutionalized policies. The US government had a long history of segregation and discriminatory practices against African Americans, both in the military and beyond. In 1941, when the Tuskegee Airmen were first formed, the GI Bill, which would later provide generous benefits to veterans returning from World War II, was still on the drafting table. However, there was a significant loophole that would have devastating consequences for African American veterans. It did not apply to them. Despite serving alongside white soldiers and facing similar risks, black Gs were denied access to many of the benefits their white counterparts enjoyed. This disparity in treatment highlights the US government's insidious underbelly, where racism seeped into every crevice of policymaking.
The NAACP, founded by James Weldon Johnson, had been advocating for equal rights for African Americans since 1909, but even its efforts were often met with resistance and denial.
Fast forward to March 1944, a group of congressmen introduced a bill aimed at addressing some of these disparities. Known as the Double Victory Bill, it aimed to provide more equitable benefits to African American veterans. However, its passage would be fraught with controversy and delay. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the Tuskegee Airmen continued to prove themselves as top-notch pilots.
Their exceptional performance led to a surge in recruitment efforts for other African Americans.
In 1944, 14,000 men from across the country volunteered to join the Army Air Forces, more than double the previous year's number. However, this surge in interest was not solely due to the Tuskegee Airmen's success. There were whispers of a different reason, a US military experiment that would push the boundaries of human experimentation and expose the dark underbelly of America's war efforts. Codenamed Mustang, it involved exposing African American pilots to controlled doses of radiation in an effort to understand its effects on their bodies. The men, unaware of what was happening, were given coffee enemas while pilots in other planes fired high-velocity bullets at them from low altitudes, simulating the kind of combat experience they would face in real life. This slurable practice continued until 1946, long after America's D-Day invasion and long before the fall of Berlin. News of Mustang wouldn't surface for decades, but its existence speaks to a sinister aspect of American history often forgotten today. The parallels between this dark chapter and modern-day events are striking. In recent years, numerous whistleblowers have come forward about similar experiments conducted on unwitting subjects in other contexts, highlighting the continued prevalence of secret human testing and manipulation by governments around the world. In conclusion, as we reflect on the Tuskegee Airmen's courageous story, it becomes clear that racism was not only a product of individuals, but also an entrenched aspect of institutional policymaking. Their struggles continue to resonate in today's America, where systemic injustices persist, from voter suppression to the dehumanizing effects of solitary confinement. We often forget the complexities surrounding this pivotal moment in history, one which set the stage for a new era of civil rights activism that would soon unfold. We remember Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic speech, but often overlook the courageous men and women who paved the way, including those like Lieutenant James H. Robinson, who defied orders to serve as an officer alongside white GIs. Their legacies remind us that the fight for equality is ongoing, with every battle pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible. In these uncertain times, it's essential to confront our nation's troubled past and continue marching towards justice, just as the Tuskegee Airmen showed us, one heroic act at a time. Their history is not just about heroism or achievement, but also about unearthing uncomfortable truths and forcing our collective consciousness into account for its crimes. As we look forward to tomorrow's struggles, may their unwavering spirit guide us towards an inclusive America that truly honors its motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. As the war drew to a close in Europe, the Tuskegee Airmen were deployed to Italy, where they continued to fly combat missions and gain recognition for their exceptional skills. However, as they fought bravely abroad, they still faced discrimination at home. In 1946, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981, mandating equal treatment and opportunity for all military personnel regardless of race, creed, or color. But the order did not immediately eradicate the racism that permeated every level of American society, including its armed forces. Many white pilots continued to harbor racist attitudes towards their black counterparts, viewing them as inferior or unworthy of recognition. This mentality was further entrenched by the legacy of segregation and Jim Crow laws that had been in place for decades. Meanwhile, back in the United States, a new kind of racism was brewing, one fueled by fear, misinformation, and outright hostility towards returning veterans who were fighting for their rights. In cities across the country, African American veterans were met with hostile crowds, attacked by white civilians who felt threatened by the idea of racial integration. One such incident occurred in February 1946, when a group of black veterans, including some Tuskegee Airmen, attempted to desegregate the main street in Clinton, Tennessee. The response was immediate and brutal. Police and local residents descended upon them with clubs, stones and bottles, injuring the men. The incident made national headlines, exposing the deep-seated racial tensions that still plagued America's society. It also galvanized a growing movement of civil rights activists who saw the veterans as pioneers in their fight for equality. Among these activists was Charles C.P. Hunter, a veteran and Tuskegee Airman himself, who would later go on to play a key role in organizing non-violent protests against segregation. As he recounted years later, it was the sight of his comrades being beaten by white civilians that galvanized him to take action. Seeing my fellow veterans attacked like animals was what sparked his desire to become involved in the civil rights movement.
Hunter's experience and others like it would eventually find its way into the emerging narrative of the civil rights movement, one that drew on the collective bravery and determination of African American veterans like the Tuskegee Airmen.
Their legacy continued to inspire activists, including figures like Martin Luther King Jr., who would cite their courage as a crucial factor in mobilizing public support for their cause. Yet, despite this growing recognition, many Tuskegee Airmen still faced immense challenges when returning to civilian life. They struggled to find employment, were frequently relegated to menial jobs, and often endured humiliation. It was a stark reminder that the struggles of these brave men extended far beyond the battlefield. Their battle for recognition would continue for decades to come, as documented in declassified files, which reveal how the US military knowingly destroyed evidence related to Mustang and other experiments involving black pilots. This deliberate cover-up speaks volumes about the entrenched racism that still lurked within institutions, forcing us to confront a haunting truth. Even during times of war and national crisis, America's darker impulses often. As we continue to navigate our nation's troubled past, we must acknowledge these painful realities, ones that have left lasting scars on individuals, communities, and society as a whole. The stories of the Tuskegee Airmen serve as a sobering reminder of what happens when systemic injustices are allowed to fester, even in the face of great progress. As we reflect on their story, it's essential to honor not only their heroism, but also the quiet strength and resilience that categorize their lives. Their fight for equality is far from over, but through sharing their history with a wider audience, we can begin to build towards a brighter future, one in which all Americans are truly treated as equal under the law. This legacy of resistance will continue to inspire us, reminding us that even in times of great struggle and injustice, there exists within every individual an unyielding spirit capable of defying seemingly insurmountable. As the Tuskegee Airmen returned to civilian life, they faced a daunting reality. Their experiences in combat had not changed the deeply ingrained racial attitudes that pervaded American society. The war years may have brought some temporary improvements, but the slow pace of change was often hindered by entrenched racism and bias. One notable exception was Lieutenant Colonel Noel F. Parrish, who became a vocal for his former comrades after serving in the 332nd Fighter Group. In 1946, he wrote a scathing letter to the Secretary of War, Harry H. Stratemeyer, expressing outrage at the treatment of African American veterans and calling for greater recognition of their contributions. However, it was not until 1947 that Congress began to take tangible steps towards rectifying the situation. Led by Representative Charles A. Wolverton from New Jersey, introduced to create a new branch of the U.S. military, the Air National Guard, which would pave the way for African American pilots to fly alongside their white counterparts. Meanwhile, back in Alabama, a separate battle was unfolding as state officials sought to maintain segregation and deny voting rights to African Americans. In 1946, Governor Thomas E. formed an advisory committee to study the feasibility of establishing a Negro State Guards unit, essentially a segregated military force that would not require integration. However, in a significant turning point, the Tuskegee Airmen themselves had other plans. After years of lobbying and protest, they successfully lobbied Congress to establish the Civil Air Patrol, an auxiliary organization that would integrate African American pilots with their white counterparts. The creation of the CAP marked a crucial moment in American history. It acknowledged the value of African American service members while laying the groundwork for further social change. As one veteran put it, "We were not just fighting for our country, we were also fighting to prove that we had something valuable to contribute." Fast forward to 1948. Lieutenant General Frank O'Driscoll Hunter Jr. He implemented significant reforms aimed at promoting greater diversity within the military, including removing racial restrictions on officer promotions. His tenure was marked by conduct. A 1949 investigation revealed that his attempts to dismantle segregation had been met with fierce resistance from senior officers who harbored racist attitudes. This led to a dramatic showdown in which Hunter faced charges of insubordination and possible court-martial, but ultimately emerged victorious, thanks to his unwavering commitment to change. The impact of these developments was far-reaching. As historian David F. Winkler notes, by the end of World War II, African Americans had gained a foothold in military aviation, but they still faced significant obstacles when it came to achieving higher ranks and positions of authority. The 1950s brought, led by the likes of Senator Hubert H. Humphrey from Minnesota, Congress passed landmark legislation that would gradually dismantle segregation in military service. Meanwhile, as this wave of social change swept across America, individual Tuskegee Airmen continued to break barriers and inspire a new generation. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr., a pioneering airman who'd first joined the Army Air Corps in 1936, rose through the ranks to become a full colonel, one of the first African American officers to achieve such status. The Tuskegee Airmen's experiences also sparked important reforms within military institutions. In 1949, The War Department implemented sweeping changes aimed at reducing segregation and promoting diversity within its ranks. The new policies allowed African Americans to compete for commissions, officer training, and other opportunities previously reserved for white personnel. Yet, despite these gains, many veterans continue to face significant challenges when returning to civilian life. As a 1950s survey by the U.S. Army's Adjutant General revealed, African American soldiers still struggle to find employment, often facing racial bias in hiring practices and promotion policies. Even today, many Americans continue to grapple with issues surrounding diversity. Equity, and inclusion. So what can we learn from this pivotal chapter in American history? Firstly, power must be exercised responsibly. The actions of those in positions of authority have far-reaching consequences for marginalized groups. Secondly, money is not a neutral force. It often serves as a tool to maintain social hierarchies and reinforce existing power structures. Consider the case of the Tuskegee Airmen, whose contributions were initially undervalued and underfunded, only to be vindicated decades later when their heroism was recognized. Thirdly, trust is essential for meaningful progress, particularly in institutions where systemic injustices have long been embedded. The US military's slow response to the needs of American veterans during World War II highlights the perils of a lack of trust and accountability within organizations. Lastly, protecting ourselves from situations requires vigilance and an unwavering commitment to promoting equality and justice. We can do this by engaging in open dialogue about our values, advocating for policies that promote diversity and inclusion, and supporting initiatives aimed at dismantling systemic racism. Practical lessons we can apply to our lives today include recognizing and challenging bias within ourselves, as individuals and institutions alike. By doing so, we can create a culture of accountability and inclusivity that honors the sacrifices of those who came before us. As one veteran of the Tuskegee Airmen once said, "We did not just fight for our country, we fought to prove that our contributions had value, and in doing so, paved the way for future generations." Their story serves as a beacon of hope and resilience.
As we delve deeper into the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, it becomes clear that their struggles were not unique to just one institution or organization.
The experiences of these brave men highlight a broader narrative about the systemic racism and segregation that pervaded American society during World War II. One of the most glaring examples of this is the treatment of African American pilots who attended flight school at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. Despite facing incredible obstacles, including racism and lack of support from their superiors, young men persevered, determined to prove themselves as capable aviators. One such pilot was Nathan F. Twining's nephew, Charles McGee, who would go on to become one of the most decorated Tuskegee Airmen. McGee recalls the challenges he faced during his time at Tuskegee.
"We had a tough road ahead of us.
We had to deal with racism, segregation, and being treated like second-class citizens. Despite these hardships, McGee and his fellow pilots worked tirelessly to master their craft, flying over 400 combat missions between them. The Tuskegee Airmen's success in the skies belied the systematic racism that they faced on the ground. In addition to facing discriminatory policies and treatment from military leaders, African American pilots were often relegated to menial tasks and denied access to advanced training programs. But it wasn't just the military that perpetuated these injustices. Many institutions, including hospitals, universities, and even some churches, contributed to a culture of segregation and racism. The Double V campaign, launched by the African American newspaper Pittsburgh Courier in 1942, aimed to highlight the dual struggles faced by Black Americans during World War II, fighting for democracy abroad. The Tuskegee Airmen's heroism in combat only served to exacerbate these tensions. Despite their impressive record of achievement, they would eventually earn a reputation as one of the top-performing fighter groups in the war. many Americans refused to recognize their contributions. It wasn't until the 1970s and 1980s, long after World War II had ended, that the Tuskegee Airmen began to receive the recognition they deserved. Their story is a powerful reminder of the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in America. As one historian notes, the Tuskegee Airmen's legacy serves as a beacon of hope for marginalized communities, demonstrating that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way forward. Today, we continue to grapple. We must acknowledge the impacts of systematic racism and work towards creating a more just society, one where everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed. By studying the Tuskegee Airmen's history and legacy, we can draw valuable lessons about the importance of responsibility, funding, trust, and accountability in promoting equality and justice. As Charles McGee so aptly put it, we didn't just fight for our country, we fought to prove that our contributions had value, and in doing so, paved the way for future generations. Their story serves as a powerful reminder of the transformative power of courage, perseverance, and determination in the face of adversity. As we move forward, let us draw inspiration from the Tuskegee Airmen's unwavering commitment to their country, despite facing injustice and inequality at every turn. By doing so, we can create a brighter future for all Americans, one where everyone has an equal chance to thrive and succeed. As we reflect on the remarkable story of the Tuskegee Airmen, it's clear that their legacy serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring impact of systemic racism on marginalized communities. The key lesson from this chapter in American history is that even in the midst of great sacrifice and achievement, equality and justice are not always guaranteed. In fact, the Tuskegee Airmen's experiences highlight the pernicious effects of institutionalized racism, which can persist long after outward symbols of oppression have been dismantled. It was not until decades after World War II that their contributions were formally recognized, and even then, it was largely due to the tireless efforts of individual Charles McGee. As we consider the lessons from this story, we're reminded that true progress towards equality requires a sustained commitment to dismantling systematic barriers. This is as much about creating opportunities for marginalized communities to participate in shaping their own destinies, as it is about addressing the lingering effects of historical injustices. So I ask you, what would be the equivalent act of courage and perseverance today? How can we draw inspiration from the Tuskegee Airmen's unwavering commitment to their country, despite facing injustice at every turn? Consider sharing this story with someone who may not know about the remarkable achievements of these pioneers in flight. Share it with a friend or family member who may be struggling to understand the complexities of systematic racism. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe to Forgotten History Daily. Every week we uncover the stories they don't want you to know. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking questions. And turn to the tumultuous years of World War II. We find ourselves amidst a nation grappling with the complexities of war and social change.
The Tuskegee Airmen's story serves as a microcosm for the broader struggles of African Americans during this period.
While they were fighting for freedom and democracy abroad, they faced entrenched racism and segregation within their own military. One of the most significant obstacles the Tuskegee Airmen encountered was the persistent skepticism from the U.S. Army Air Corps. Despite their exceptional performance in training, many commanding officers doubted their ability to fly combat missions. This distrust was rooted in the prevailing racist attitudes of the time, which viewed African Americans as inferior and unsuited for complex tasks. In 1942, the 1st Squadron of Tuskegee Airmen, the 99th Pursuit Squadron, was deployed to North Africa. Led by Captain Charles McGee, one of the most decorated Tuskegee Airmen, this group faced intense pressure from their superiors to prove themselves in combat. The squadron's early performances were met with skepticism, and many questioned whether they could adapt to the high-stakes world of air warfare. However, as the 99th Pursuit Squadron began to rack up impressive kills and complete successful missions, their doubters were slowly silenced. The Tuskegee Airmen's achievements in North Africa paved the way for future deployments to Italy and, eventually, Germany. As the war drew to a close, the Tuskegee Airmen continued to excel in combat. Their success was not limited to individual performances. They also played a crucial role in shaping military tactics and strategies. The 99th Pursuit Squadron's innovative approaches to air warfare, including their use of aggressive escort tactics, were adopted by other squadrons, significantly enhancing overall Allied performance. Despite their remarkable contributions, the Tuskegee Airmen faced numerous challenges on their return to the United States. Many struggled to find employment or secure veterans' benefits as they continued to face racial barriers in civilian life. The legacy of systemic racism, perpetuated through discriminatory practices and policies, made it difficult for African American veterans to transition back into society. The Tuskegee Airmen's story is a poignant reminder that the struggle for equality and justice extends beyond the battlefield. It highlights the importance of continued activism and advocacy in dismantling institutionalized racism, ensuring that marginalized communities have equal opportunities to participate in shaping their own destinies. As we explore the complexities of systematic racism, it becomes clear that the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen serves as a powerful catalyst for change. Their unwavering commitment to fighting for freedom and democracy, despite facing injustice at every turn, offers us valuable lessons in perseverance and courage. In the words of Captain Charles McGee, "We were not just pilots, we were ambassadors of hope."
We flew not only for our country but also for the next generation of African Americans who would follow in our footsteps. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen serves as a testament to the enduring power of human resilience and determination.
Their courage and perseverance continue to inspire us today, urging us to push against systematic barriers and strive towards a more just and equitable society.
As we conclude this chapter on the Tuskegee Airmen's story, we invite you to reflect on your own relationship with history.
Consider how the experiences of these pioneers can inform your understanding of contemporary social issues. How might their legacy inspire you to become an agent for change? Join us next time as we delve into another forgotten chapter in American history, one that sheds light on the complexities of systematic racism and its impact on marginalized communities. Subscribe to Forgotten History Daily to stay informed about the stories they don't want you to know. Together, let's uncover the hidden truths and shed new light on the struggles of those who paved the way for a more just society.